I was still holding the receipt from Golden Triangle Federal Credit Union when my wife looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'm moving in with Shane and my mom is coming too." She said it the way someone might mention the weather, casual, almost bored. I didn't drop the paper. I didn't shout. I just nodded once and said, "Good. Be gone by tonight." That was the moment their faces fell. My wife's smirk collapsing, Shane's name choking in her throat, and her mother tightening her grip on the doorway, like she just discovered gravity worked differently. People talk about heartbreak, like it comes with fireworks or thunder. Mine arrived in a quiet Beaumont kitchen next to a humming Frigidaire and a cold plate of leftover gumbo. Only after that moment did everything begin to blur and sharpen at the same time. My name is Jason Rodriguez, and at 57 years old, I thought I understood what marriage meant. I grew up in Port Arthur, moved to Beaumont in my 20s, built a steady life welding pipeline for ExxonMobil, and did everything the right way. Or at least I tried to. I believed in sticking things out, in loyalty, and helping family when they needed it. That belief, that stubborn old-fashioned loyalty, is how I ended up spending the last 9 months paying off $165,000 of debt that didn't even belong to me. It started with a whisper over dinner. My wife Ashley saying her mother had fallen behind at the Louisiana casinos. Then came a second trip to Lake Charles, then unpaid medical bills, then credit card debt stacked so high, I wondered how they ever slept at night. Each time she looked at me like I was the only lifeline between her family and ruin, and I was foolish enough to believe helping them somehow made me a good husband. I remember sitting at Golden Triangle Federal Credit Union the day I signed the last set of papers. The loan officer, a woman named Rachel, kept saying things like, "You're doing a noble thing, and family is family." I remember my hand cramping as I signed the final document, the number $165,000 sitting there in thick black print like a bruise. Ashley didn't even come with me that day, said she was getting her nails done. So, when she stood in our kitchen that Tuesday afternoon and announced she was leaving, I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was. "You're what?" I finally managed. Ashley folded her arms. "I said I'm leaving. I'm moving in with Shane, and Mom is coming too. She needs support." Her mother, Nicole, nodded like some sort of disappointed nun. "We hope you'll be adult enough to accept this." A month earlier, I had written the final check that wiped out her debt. The irony stung more than anything else in that room. "And you expect to stay here?" I asked. Ashley shrugged. "Why shouldn't we? You're the one who's always out working overtime. Besides, the house is in both our names." Nicole stepped in, her voice syrupy and self-righteous. "And Jason, you really should focus on what matters. Money comes and goes, but my daughter's happiness has suffered for years." I could have laughed. Instead, I inhaled slow and deep, the kind of breath you take before stepping into cold water. "Good," I said, my voice even. "Be gone by tonight." The room froze. Ashley blinked rapidly like she was waiting for the punchline. "You're serious?" she asked. I walked past them, opened the door, and pointed outside. "Pack up. Be out by 10. I want the keys on the counter." Nicole sputtered. "You can't just throw us out." "Oh, I can," I said. "And I am." Ashley's face twisted. "Jason, don't be childish. We'll leave when we're ready. You don't control—" "I control my home," I said sharply, "and I'm done being your safety net." For once, Ashley didn't have a comeback ready. I stepped out onto the porch, letting the humid Texas air hit my skin. The sun was dropping behind the neighbor's live oak, turning everything gold and sharp. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden clarity that washed over me. Everything I believed about my marriage had been a lie. Everything I gave had been taken for granted. Every sacrifice had been fuel for their convenience. But I also knew something. Ashley and Nicole weren't nearly as smart as they thought. They assumed I'd fold, that I'd be too stunned or too soft to push back. They assumed that draining me dry made me weak. They were wrong. As I stood on that porch watching the light fade over Beaumont, I realized something simple and powerful. I wasn't the one who'd lost anything, not yet. But they would, and it would start sooner than they expected. I stepped back into the house, folded the credit union receipt, carefully slid it into my wallet, and said to myself, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was sad, at least not in the way people expect, but because my body felt like it had been unplugged from something familiar and shoved into a socket I'd never seen before. I sat in my recliner until dawn, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to the AC kick on and off. Every few minutes, a little voice would whisper, "How could she do this after everything you paid?" Another voice whispered back, "She was planning this the whole time." By morning, I was tired of wrestling with both voices. I showered, dressed in clean jeans and an old Carhartt jacket, and headed to H-E-B to pick up a few groceries. I figured a quiet errand would clear my head, maybe give me a bit of normalcy. It didn't. I'd barely stepped into the produce section when I saw them. Ashley, Shane, and Nicole trailing behind like a judgmental parade float. They weren't whispering. They weren't hiding. They weren't even pretending to feel guilty. They were laughing loudly. Shane had a hand on the cart, pushing it like he owned the place. He was wearing a new Carhartt hoodie, the kind I knew wasn't cheap. Ashley was tossing ribeye, steaks, wine, Gulf shrimp, and imported cheese into the cart like she was filming a cooking show. And then Shane reached into his pocket, pulled out a familiar blue card, and held it up. My card. My damn credit card. I ducked behind a display of oranges, my heart thumping like I'd run 10 miles. I wasn't scared. I was humiliated, enraged, sick to my stomach. I watched as Ashley leaned into Shane, laughing at some stupid joke, her hand brushing his arm the way she used to brush mine. Nicole spotted a display of king cakes and clapped her hands. "Oh, grab two. Jason always hated sweets. We can finally enjoy ourselves." Ashley grinned. "Put it on the card." Shane smirked. "His card, with pleasure." I watched them walk toward the checkout lane, toward the self-checkout, of course, the easiest place to overspend without a cashier noticing. Meanwhile, I stood there gripping an 89-cent can of chicken noodle soup and a loaf of bread with a red discount sticker on it. A man knows when he's being disrespected, but this was deliberate, weaponized, calculated humiliation. I didn't approach them. I didn't say a word. What I did was follow them quietly, carefully, close enough to hear everything, but far enough that they didn't see me. I watched Shane tap my card at the self-checkout like he was buying gum instead of $178 worth of groceries. He didn't even look around. They strolled out of the store laughing, loading the bags into the back of Shane's lifted Silverado, the same truck he bragged about every time I'd reluctantly seen him before. His pride and joy, the chrome exhaust pipes gleamed like he polished them every night. I stood there at the window, soup and bread in hand, feeling the kind of anger that thins the blood. But anger is useful when you learn to shape it. That afternoon, I stopped by Rigger's Tavern to clear my head. The place smelled like beer, boudin, and old wood, comforting in a way. My buddy Mike was shooting pool near the back. He looked up and frowned. "Jason, you look like you've been chewed up and spit out by a Christmas tree shaker. You all right?" "Ashley left," I said simply. Mike didn't flinch. He just sighed. "Yeah, folks been talking." That hit harder than anything that happened at H-E-B. "Talking?" I asked. Mike nodded slow. "Jason, half the refinery knew she was running around with Shane. I thought you knew too. We didn't want to embarrass you by saying anything." Embarrass me, as if there was anything left to protect. I left Rigger's early, stomach hollowing again. When I got home, my phone was blinking with 3 new voicemails, all from Nicole. I hit play. "Jason," she began sweetly, "I hope you're taking time to reflect. A real man doesn't cling to money. It comes and goes, but my daughter's happiness, that's priceless." I nearly threw the phone across the room. Her next message was worse. "Honestly, Jason, after everything you did, I thought you'd be more mature about this. You should have the grace to let Ashley be with someone who truly appreciates her." I shut the phone off before the third message even played. By the time I called a lawyer the next morning, my frustration had fermented into something sharper. His name was James Rodriguez, Big Jim, a short, calm man with silver hair and the kind of voice that could convince you the world wasn't ending, even when it was. I told him everything. Every dollar, every debt, every humiliation. When I finished, he nodded once. "You'll need evidence, print statements, take screenshots, keep records of what they're spending and where." I told him about the H-E-B scene. He didn't smile, but his eyes lit just enough to say that was useful. "And Jason," he added, tapping his pen, "don't confront them, not at home, not in private. You don't want them claiming domestic violence. It happens more than you'd think. A seed planted, one that would bloom later. When I left his office, I checked my bank account, something I should have done days earlier. There it was. A transfer I didn't recognize. Not the big one yet, just enough to warn me something was coming. The next few days felt like walking through fog with a flashlight whose batteries were dying. Everything looked familiar, but nothing felt solid. I kept catching myself reaching for routines that no longer existed. Making coffee for two, checking the front window for Ashley's car, setting aside mail with her name on it before remembering I didn't need to do that anymore. What I did need to do was gather evidence. Big Jim had been clear. Don't react emotionally, react strategically. So I printed bank statements until my old HP printer whined in protest. I screenshotted credit card transactions from the last 2 months. H-E-B, Target, Home Depot, and a dozen gas station charges that clearly weren't mine. And every few hours, a new charge popped up. 4976 H-E-B, 118.22. Home Depot, 7290 Shane's Rig Services LLC, The Audacity. $384.10 Academy Sports. It was like watching termites chew through the last beams of a house. But the worst part wasn't the money, it was the messages. Ashley texted me only once in that week, as casual as someone reminding a neighbor to bring in their garbage can. Don't forget to pay the water bill. We used a lot of hot water since Mom's been showering here. No apology, no shame, just entitlement so thick I could taste it. I didn't reply, I didn't need to. The universe had another kind of reply ready for me. On Thursday morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, highlighting bank entries, when I saw a police cruiser pull up outside. My heart sank. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because nothing good ever starts with a car like that in front of your house. 2 officers stepped out, one older, one young enough to still look apologetic as he approached. "Mr. Rodriguez?" the older one asked. "Yes, sir." "We received a call. A family member reported you made a threatening remark." I knew exactly who. Nicole always did have a flair for theatrics. "What kind of threat?" I asked, folding my arms. "She claims you told her she would regret crossing you," the older officer said carefully. "We're just here to do a wellness check, make sure everyone's safe." I laughed, dry, humorless. "Officer, the only thing I told her was to leave my house, and the only thing she's regretting is losing access to my wallet." The younger officer's mouth twitched, almost a smile. They asked me a few routine questions, looked around, and after 5 minutes realized the only danger in my home was the mess of paperwork covering the table. Before leaving, the older one said quietly, "This kind of complaint happens a lot during separations. Just be careful and keep things documented." I knew exactly what he meant. False domestic violence accusations ruin men every year, especially men my age who don't know the system. As the cruiser pulled away, something in me hardened. It wasn't fear, it was focus. They wanted to play dirty. Fine. I could play clean and still win. The breaking point came the next morning at the bank. I'd gone in to ask about setting up an account in my name only. The teller, a young woman named Rachel, pulled up my profile on her monitor. I watched her smile fade. Mr. Rodriguez, did you authorize a transfer yesterday?" My stomach tightened. "What transfer?" She turned the screen toward me, just enough for me to see the amount. $1,400 to $800 transferred from our joint account to Shane Murphy Rig Services, LLC. My throat went dry. "That wasn't me," I said. Rachel nodded, lowering her voice. "Then you're going to want to print this. If that money wasn't authorized, it's a problem. A legal problem. A legal problem." The words hit like a hammer. This wasn't groceries anymore. This wasn't petty spending. This was a marital asset transfer to a third party. A type of financial betrayal judges did not take lightly. As she printed the document, I felt a strange wave roll through me. Anger, yes, but also something else. Relief. Because finally, after all the humiliation, all the noise, all the gaslighting and manipulation, I had them cold, concrete, judge-approved evidence. I walked out of the bank with the pages tucked under my arm like armor. The sky was gray and heavy, the kind of Beaumont morning that usually made me want to crawl back into bed. But that day, the air felt sharp, charged, almost electric. I sat in my truck, gripping the wheel, the papers trembling in my hand. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd roll over. They thought age made me soft. But all they'd done was hand me the rope they were about to hang themselves with. I looked at the document one more time and whispered, Now I've got you. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove straight to Big Jim's office with a 4800 transfer receipt still warm from my hand. He was in the middle of another meeting, but when his receptionist showed him the paper, he stepped out immediately. He read it once, then twice, then his eyebrows lifted in a way I hadn't seen before. "Jason," he said, lowering his voice, "this is exactly what we needed." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in a week. "So, what now?" "Now," Big Jim said, "we file for divorce today, before they drain anything else. Filing first might not sound like much, but in family court it matters more than people think. It sets the tone. It establishes control. It signals to the judge that you're not the one being reactionary. You're the one taking responsible action." But Big Jim wasn't done. He tapped the $14,800 transfer line with his pen. "And we're going to request reimbursement for marital waste. She used joint funds to financially support her lover. That's going to backfire on her in court." I nodded slowly. Big Jim leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "There's one more thing. You need to move out of the house temporarily." That hit me harder than I expected. "Move out? Why? I'm not the one cheating." "I know," he said calmly, "but she's already made one false claim through her mother. If she or Nicole makes a domestic violence allegation, even a fabricated one, you could be removed from the home by force. Judges err on the side of caution." I opened my mouth to argue, but Big Jim held up a hand. "This isn't weakness, Jason. This is a strategic retreat, a legal tactic. You remove the opportunity for them to trap you. You keep your record clean, and you'll look responsible and stable in front of the judge." Strategic retreat. The words hung in the air like a military order. And deep down, I knew he was right. I'd already seen how low they were willing to go. "Where am I supposed to stay?" I asked. Big Jim shrugged. "Somewhere simple, cheap, clean, just for a few days. Extended stay America's fine. Judges see that all the time." So, that's exactly where I went. The extended stay America off I-10 wasn't glamorous, but it wasn't terrible either. The key card worked. The room smelled like cheap detergent. The bedspread looked like it had survived 1,000 travelers before me. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night, staring at the beige walls, listening to the muffled sound of traffic outside. It felt strange being the one who had to leave my own house while they settled in like vultures picking a carcass clean. But then, I remembered Big Jim's words. Strategic retreat. This wasn't surrender, it was setup, and the payoff was coming. The next morning, Big Jim filed the divorce petition. By noon, Ashley had been served. I didn't see her receive the papers, but I didn't have to. She called me within minutes, screaming, "You coward! You blindsided me!" I kept my voice steady. "You blindsided me. You knew I wasn't happy, Jason. You never tried to understand me." I almost laughed. The woman who let me pay off her family's $165,000 debt was now accusing me of not understanding her. Before I could respond, Nicole grabbed the phone. "You're destroying this family after all we've done for you." I hung up mid-rant. Let them scream. Let them panic. It meant the plan was working. 2 days later, Ashley hired an attorney, a combative woman named Stephanie Clark, known in Beaumont for turning every conversation into a brawl. Stephanie sent Big Jim a letter claiming the $165,000 I paid was a gift, not community debt reimbursement. Big Jim responded by attaching the bank statements, the loan documents, and the text messages Ashley sent me begging for one last payment. Then Big Jim filed a motion requesting reimbursement for half the $165,000, full reimbursement of the $14,800, temporary exclusive possession of the home, removal of Ashley, Shane, and Nicole from the property, and a freeze on joint accounts. It was a beautiful thing to see, printed in neat paragraphs with legal authority behind every word. When I looked over the document, my chest tightened with something that felt suspiciously like hope. Meanwhile, Shane flaunted his stupidity across town. I saw him by chance in the Home Depot parking lot, leaning against his beloved Silverado, bragging loudly to a buddy about moving into the Rodriguez house and how Ashley's money was finally being put to good use. Ashley's money. The irony nearly knocked me over. He revved the engine like it was an extension of his ego. Chrome exhaust, custom tires, polished grille. He loved that truck more than anything else in his life. Probably more than Ashley if I were being honest. But watching him brag, I suddenly knew something. That truck was going to mean something to this story. I didn't know how yet, but life has a way of humbling men who hide behind horsepower. When the court date arrived, I ironed my best navy blazer, shined my shoes, and drove downtown to the Jefferson County Courthouse. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't scared. I wasn't defeated. I was ready to speak the truth, ready to expose what they'd done, ready to take back my life piece by piece. The morning of the hearing felt different, steadier, quieter, almost solemn. Not the calm before a storm, but the calm of a man who has finally stopped running. I arrived at Jefferson County Courthouse early. The building's brick exterior looked imposing against the overcast Texas sky, but I felt lighter than I had in months. Big Jim met me in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, files tucked under his arm like a soldier preparing for battle. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since HEB," I said. He smiled at that. Ashley arrived 10 minutes later, wearing a dress I'd bought her years ago, back when we still went to church on Sundays and talked about growing old together. Shane walked beside her, shoulders squared, chest puffed out like he thought this was some kind of parade. Nicole followed behind them, shaking her head at me as if I had betrayed them. Funny how delusion works. When the bailiff called the room to order, we all stood. The judge entered, a stern woman named Judge Maria Santos, known for her no-nonsense approach. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and glanced down at the stack of paperwork in front of her. "Let's begin," she said. Big Jim went first. He laid everything out with calm precision. The loan documents, the credit union receipts, the timeline of payments, the texts begging me to save the family, the HEB charges, the voicemails dripping in hypocrisy, and finally, the gem of the case, the $14,800 transfer from our joint account to Shane's rig services business. Stephanie, Ashley's attorney, tried to interrupt several times, but Judge Santos shut her down with a firm, "You'll have your turn, Ms. Clark." Then came that turn. Stephanie stood, heels clicking sharply against the floor, and launched into a speech about marital generosity, how the $165,000 was a gift, how I'd been overly emotional, and how Ashley had sought comfort in a friend due to emotional neglect. Judge Santos didn't blink. "Ms. Clark," she said, "even if the debt payment were a gift, which is unclear at best, the transfer of $14,800 to a third party appears to be dissipation of marital assets. Please explain that." Stephanie stammered. Shane shifted in his seat. Ashley's face went pale. Well, Stephanie began. "The transfer was, repayment for handyman work Shane did around the Rodriguez home." Big Jim raised an eyebrow, barely containing a laugh. Judge Santos looked at Ashley. "Did you authorize this repayment?" Ashley swallowed. I didn't think Jason would mind." The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Rodriguez, that's not how joint marital funds work." Then she turned to Shane. "Mr. Murphy, did you perform $14,800 worth of labor at the Rodriguez home?" Shane opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "No, ma'am," he finally muttered. "Did you perform any work at all?" He slumped. "A couple hours, maybe." The courtroom murmured. Even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. Judge Santos sat back, expression carved from stone. The ruling came fast. In light of the evidence presented, the court finds the transfer of $14,800 to Mr. Murphy improper and orders full reimbursement to Mr. Rodriguez. Ashley gasped. Shane put his face in his hands. Judge Santos continued, voice steady and merciless. "Furthermore, the court orders Mrs. Rodriguez to repay Mr. Rodriguez for half of the $165,000 debt payoff, as it was clearly marital debt incurred before separation." Nicole cried out, "This is injustice." Judge Santos slammed her gavel lightly. "Ma'am, one more outburst and I will have you removed." Then came the final blow. Mr. Rodriguez is hereby granted temporary exclusive possession of the marital home. Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Murphy, and Mrs. Cooper must vacate the property within 72 hours. The sound that rose in the courtroom wasn't cheering. This wasn't a movie, but the hush, the ripple of whispers, the shift in energy. It felt like justice itself exhaling. Ashley turned to me with watery eyes. "Jason, please, we can work this out." I shook my head. "You worked it out with Shane." Shane glared at me. You think you won? No, I said. I know I did. The fallout began immediately. 2 days after the ruling, Shane had to sell his beloved Silverado to gather the money owed. I happened to see it listed online, the words "urgent must sell" written in all caps. For a man like Shane, losing that truck hurt worse than losing the house. I won't lie, I smiled. Ashley and Nicole loaded their belongings into a borrowed minivan, shooting daggers at me as they drove off. Not one of them said goodbye. Good. The house was quiet afterward, still. But it wasn't a lonely kind of quiet. For the first time in a long while, it felt like mine. But the story didn't end there. Word travels fast in Beaumont, especially through the refinery network. Within a week, everyone knew what had happened. Mike filled me in during our next visit to Rigger's Tavern. Shane got fired, he said, setting down his beer. Company doesn't tolerate supervisors with financial drama. Bad for insurance, they said. I raised an eyebrow. Fired? Yep. And get this. Ashley tried to get a job at the casino in Lake Charles. They wouldn't hire her. Seems Nicole's gambling debts made them both persona non grata. The irony was perfect. Nicole's casino addiction, which started this whole mess, had now closed off their easiest escape route. What about the $82,500? Mike asked. Court-ordered wage garnishment, I said. Ashley's working at a Subway now, trying to make payments. $26.50 comes out of every paycheck. Mike whistled low. That's going to take a while. 15 years, give or take. I took a sip of my beer, assuming she keeps the job. The $14,800 from Shane came faster. He liquidated everything. The boat he bragged about, his motorcycle, even his tool collection. Desperate men make stupid financial decisions, and Shane proved the rule perfectly. I received the check on a Thursday, exactly 3 weeks after the court ruling. The memo line read, "Full settlement, S. Murphy." I deposited it the same day and used part of it to buy a new gas grill. The old one had been Ashley's choice. Too small, wrong color. This one was mine. A month later, I ran into Rachel at HEB, the same teller who'd shown me the unauthorized transfer. She was off duty, shopping with her kids. "Mr. Rodriguez," she called out. "How did everything work out?" "Better than I expected," I said. "Thanks for catching that transfer." She smiled. "Just doing my job. But I have to ask, was it worth it? The legal battle, I mean." I thought about that for a moment. "Rachel, you ever been taken advantage of so bad you forgot who you were?" She nodded slowly. "Then you know it's not about the money. It's about getting yourself back." That night, I called my sister in Houston. I hadn't spoken to family in months, too embarrassed to admit what was happening at home. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. "You did the right thing, Jason," she said finally. "Dad would have been proud." Dad. He'd been a pipeline welder too, back when the work was even more dangerous and the pay was a fraction of what I made. He taught me that a man's word was his bond and that people who break trust don't deserve second chances. "Maybe," I said. "I just got tired of being everyone's ATM." "You weren't an ATM," she said firmly. "You were a husband trying to help his wife's family. There's a difference." 3 months after the court ruling, I decided to update the house. New paint, new furniture, new everything. I wanted to erase every trace of the life Ashley and I had built together. It sounds bitter, but it wasn't. It was cleansing. The biggest change was the kitchen. I ripped out the old island where Ashley used to sit and complain about money while spending it. In its place, I installed a proper breakfast bar where I could eat my morning eggs and read the paper in peace. On weekends, I started hosting poker games. Mike and some of the other guys from the refinery would come over, and we'd play until late, drinking beer and telling stories. The house felt alive again, filled with real friendship instead of manipulative obligation. One evening, as the last hand was being dealt, Mike asked the question I'd been expecting. "You ever think about dating again?" I looked around the table. Good men, honest men, the kind who'd give you the shirt off their backs but wouldn't steal your credit card. "Maybe someday," I said, "but right now, I'm enjoying the quiet." And I was. For the first time in years, I could come home without wondering what crisis awaited me. No desperate phone calls, no guilt trips, no manufactured emergencies designed to separate me from my paycheck. That night, after everyone left, I went out back and fired up the new grill. I cooked myself thick Gulf shrimp, the first ones I'd made in 25 years without someone complaining they were too spicy or too expensive. I sat alone at the patio table, listening to the cicadas, smelling the mesquite, feeling the weight finally lift off my shoulders. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's a simple meal in a peaceful house you fought to reclaim. When the last bite was gone, I leaned back and let out a long breath, one that felt like closure. "If you're still listening," I said softly, "thanks for sticking with me. And if this story meant something to you, feel free to share it or maybe follow along for the next one." I smiled, not bitter, not triumphant, just free. Take care of yourselves, and don't ever let anyone make you feel small.